get started, but you were in worship, you know that our text for today was the widow of Zarephath. The prophet Elijah goes and greets and finds her, but this is a time of severe famine, and the widow is quite literally starving. When I say, I'm curious, I'm in a pastoral privilege. When we talk about the widow of Zarephath, do you imagine an old woman or a young woman?
Young, because she has a young child.
Yeah. For some reason, in my imagination, I always think of this older woman. And then the child enters the story, right? And so I have to correct my brain. But I've found other people who's like, oh yeah, that's right. No, this is probably even a nursing, right? So we think of the famines and the imagery we get of famine in drought-stricken Africa or the Middle East, in Palestine now, these times of starvation that are happening, and this is the context, right? And it got us as an adult ed team thinking about questions of food security and how we tend to that in our community. We have firsthand relationships with a number of partners in ministry that help us with that in many different ways. In the background is a really important partner, and that sits Second Harvest Heartland, which operates, and I don't need to steal the thunder, but they're the food bank, right? That resource that comes up with the primary food resources. Now, we also collect food here at the church that ends up going to the food shelf directly, and those are a lot of boxed and shelf stable items, but fresh items. We really the food shelf relies heavily on Second Harvest to be the primary source. So we are lucky that we have Dylan McNeill here with us, and he is going to teach us everything we ever wanted to know about Second Harvest and the work that we do. But we're glad that we have them in partnership in the background as well. So Dylan, come, thank you and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you all for having me. I've been here once before to vote years ago, but I'm in the Shoreview area, so not too far from here. But thank you all for having me. I've been at Second Harvest Heartland for 4 years. I'm on their development team, so my title is Individual and Corporate Giving Specialist. So if you have any questions of how to give, love to answer that. But here just to really let you guys know more about our organization and how we're really leading the fight in our communities to battle this hunger battle. So what I'm going to be going over during this presentation. So what is a food bank compared to a food shelf? What's the difference between those things? What hunger looks like in our communities today? How we at Second Harvest Heartland are fighting that hunger? And then how we continue to fuel that work and continue our mission. So the work of a food bank. So this is kind of a snapshot. We're now in Brooklyn Park. We used to be in Maplewood. We moved to Brooklyn Park in 2020, and we have a 277,000 square foot distribution center. We don't like to call it a warehouse. The food you're seeing there is our shelf stable food. In our distribution center, we have between 8 to 10 million pounds of food that are getting constantly picked up and sent out into our communities. We have about 12 million pounds of food a month sent out our doors. We cover about 59 counties of Minnesota and Western Wisconsin. The difference between a food bank and a food shelf, we're stocking food shelf shelves. So we're sending them fresh produce, shelf stable items such as beans, mesa flour, the list goes on and on, water, that kind of thing. Food shelves will order directly from us. About 74% of the food on food shelves come directly from Second Harvest Heartland. I think a lot of people think that their annual fundraiser for their food shelf keeps those shelves stocked, but unfortunately, and they have to continue ordering fresh food to make sure those shelves stay stocked. I'll show you a map here just to kind of show you the layout of our service area. So this is our 59 county area we cover of Minnesota and Western Wisconsin. We're actually the 3rd largest food bank in the country. It's Los Angeles, Everything's bigger in Texas, so that's Houston, and then Second Harvest. So it's cool that we're this big, but it's also unfortunate that we need to be this big in order to meet the need of our communities. And so you also maybe can see these light green dots. Those are our agency partners. So we have over 1,100 agency partners. That could be a church basement, a food shelf, a backpack program, and the list can go on from there. But we're distributing to all those areas. And as we continue this work, we're looking at our service area and where the real need is. You can see a lot of our green dots are in the Twin Cities. But as we look to our neighbors in rural counties, I grew up in Swift County. Oh, here. There's food shelves, but it takes far longer to get there. In these rural towns, you know, the biggest town usually gets the food shelf. And so people are having to drive farther and farther. And so how are we meeting the need there as we're meeting the need in the cities? And so our work is really continuing in that exploration as well. Any questions so
Just so
far?
you know that there's a pointer in the,
Oh.
push the center dot of that. And
Now I'm becoming dangerous.
Yeah.
So look out. Yeah,
So I see a lot of Minnesota that is not covered by you. Do you have aspirations to grow that out, or what are your plans, or?
great question. Yeah, great question. So it's true. You see up here, down here, and the rest of Wisconsin, that all is white. There are other food banks in the state. So we're one of 5. So there's one in Rochester, Channel 1 Food Bank. There's one in St. Croix Valley, that's the closest one to us. And then there's a couple up north that cover those. But in terms of pounds getting out our doors, we're the largest as well in the state. So we're sending out, again, 12 million pounds a month. That's more than Rochester sends out in a year. Just to think of the difference in volume. Our heaviest days are 500,000 pounds in one day out our doors. So very, very busy. Our mission as an organization is a simple one, but very challenging and complex to get there, and that's end hunger together. So as one of the nation's largest, most efficient and innovative food banks, we're also a member of Feeding America. So what Feeding America is just a network of over 200 food banks across the country, working together, seeing how different projects are working in communities, and we're just kind of working with each other. Feeding America also does national grants, and they just help us with food sourcing. So how can we source the best and most, cheap option when purchasing in bulk? And so a good thing that you pointed out, Peter, is when you guys do those annual food donations, we love those to go to those local food shelves where they can use those. Second Harvest is purchasing in such bulk and quantity that we're not able to, it's harder for us to sort that out, to send out, versus you can bring that directly to that food shelf to use.
at Keystone, they are grateful for these donations because it puts variety on their shelves. So when clients come in, they actually have a choice. Whereas if they're getting a pallet of Cheerios from Second Harvest, then it's only Cheerios on the shelf, kind of thing, so.
Yeah. And we're doing a lot as well with food rescue. So we're now kind of working with our food shelves to get their own kind of work with this, but we're going to all of the Targets, Cubs, Kowalski's, picking up that food that wasn't, it's either not deemed pretty enough to be on the shelf, or it's closer to that expiration date where they would have otherwise just thrown it away. We're taking that, we're bringing it directly to food shelves to be served to the community. And that's free of cost to those food shelves. They're not paying for that or anything. Last year alone, we distributed 40 million pounds of fresh produce that would have otherwise just gone to landfills. So that's a huge, we have the food here. It's just being able to getting it to the places it needs to go to serve our communities. All right, I'll just do a snapshot quick of hunger today, what that looks like for our state. 68% of Minnesotans live paycheck to paycheck. And a lot of those people don't have a safety net. So if you're thinking of a child gets sick or someone gets laid off in the house, well, that first thing that people usually cut out of their budget is hunger. And that looks different for a lot of different families. It could be parents skipping a meal so their kids can eat more. The list kind of goes on and on from there. And so the cool thing about Second Harvest Heartland, no pun intended, our meat and potatoes is keeping those shelves stocked at food shelves. But I'm also gonna dive into some of our programs that we have as an organization as well, that continue to meet neighbors who are falling through those cracks and meeting them with a familiar, nutritious meal that they can enjoy. All right, so at our Brooklyn Park facility, we have a really cool volunteer center. And so if you ever volunteered at the Maplewood location too, we love our volunteers. And so what happens is we'll get potatoes, onions, carrots that come from either the USDA, we'll get them from local farmers. Our wonderful volunteers, we send them in 2-ton pallets, and a food shelf isn't gonna use 2 tons of potatoes or onions before they go old. So we have our nice volunteers pack them in 30-pound bags that then food shelves can order a 30-pound bag of potatoes. And so then they can put those on their shelf for however they display it at their food shelf. It goes from our distribution center with our trucks to our neighbors, or to our food shelf partners where they display them, and then right to our neighbors' table. So that's one way that we meet the need with our volunteer center. Last year alone, we had, I'll probably hit this too. We had a lot of volunteers. I'm getting ahead of myself, but over 16,000 volunteers came through our doors last year. So that helped us not have to hire 27 full-time jobs. That keeps our costs down on our end. So a really cool thing about Second Harvest, every dollar donated, we're able to purchase 3 meals worth of groceries with $1. And with our volunteer work and all that, 93 cents of every dollar goes straight to that food purchase, where the rest of that goes to keeping the lights on at Second Harvest. So the amount that goes right to that food purchase is really high for donations. It's really fun. It's an hour and a half, 2 hours. It's fun to bring groups together. You can do a little food packing and then continue on with your day. Every day of the week, and then every other Saturday, we're open for volunteer shifts. Any questions so far? Yeah,
How does the need in rural communities compare to that in the metro area?
that's a great question. It's higher in rural communities. I don't have a direct number for you. Right now we're doing work. We have a moonshot goal. Our moonshot goal is to cut hunger in half by 2030. When I joined Second Harvest in 2020, we served 107 million meals in our 59 county region. In 2023, last year, we distributed 128 million. By the end of this year, we're projected to hit 145 million. And so as we continue to send more and more pounds out, we projected by 2030, we wouldn't be able to meet that need from our one location. And so we need to do something now in order to help cut that need in half by 2030. So what we've been doing is diving into our 59 county region, hearing from our food shelf partners what the need is. How can we meet the need better and more efficiently? And so those rural communities, we've been doing a focus group in Wilmer and kind of seeing how they differentiate in their need and how we can help in a rural community versus, in the rural or urban area of the Twin Cities. And so the need is higher. And then we're just trying to find ways of, do we need to send frozen meals out there? Do we need better hours at food shelves? Do we need more locations and better access? It's interesting, every food shelf is kind of different and they're open for different hours of the day. And so if someone's working a full schedule day or multiple jobs during the week, it's hard to get to a food shelf when it's open. And so that's kind of a thing we're seeing too, is maybe we need more mobile distribution sites where we can drop off at a certain time, hand out fresh produce and that kind of thing.
I chaired food shelf board in Staples, Minnesota
yeah.
for
Yeah.
many years. And we went to a 2-day-a-week distribution, but then added one evening per month to try to accommodate. People were allowed to come once a month and be served once a month. So we had at least one evening per month that was available for those whose jobs would not permit, whose jobs or schedules would not permit.
Yeah, great. And so it's really, just seeing each community and how they differentiate and how they work together in communities and just being able to tap into that and just see how they need to be served. Great question. I'm going to dive into some of our programs. So again, really talking about how we keep those, you know, the food rescue going and volunteer center going, and then keeping those shelf-stable items on food shelf shelves. Here, I'm gonna highlight some programs that we also do at Second Harvest that continue to meet people again who are falling through the cracks, or don't have access to a kitchen, that kind of thing. We help with SNAP, and so SNAP is formerly known as food stamps. That's a government program. I'm just gonna highlight a little bit. I'm not an expert in SNAP, but I know just a few talking points. The SNAP application, when you're filling that out, it's 10 pages long and it's in English. And so if English isn't your primary language, your first language, it can be very difficult to fill out, and you want to make sure you're filling it out correctly in order to get those benefits. So people can call right into Second Harvest Heartland. We have bilingual staff who will help them fill that application out correctly. Once you fill out that application, you have to submit it. It takes between 3 to 6 weeks for those benefits to hit, for you to get those. You also have to complete an interview process in order to get those SNAP benefits. So if they call in, we help them fill out those SNAP application. We also can help them get access to a local food shelf. And so if they need food tomorrow, they can't wait a month to get those benefits. They can get access to food tomorrow. Another interesting fact about SNAP, you get a certain amount a month. And so it depends on your family size, your age, and the list can kind of go on and on. The high amount, it's a little over $200 you can get a month for groceries. The end of it is $23 a month. And so we see a lot of seniors who apply for SNAP. It's only $23 a month. Try filling a bag of groceries for $23 at Walmart or the list. Yeah.
How would applicants know to call you? I mean, is Second Harvest Heartland's number on the application, or how would they?
Yeah, great question. Usually if they contact their local, when they're picking up their application at the county, usually they'll hand us our information. Or if they look online for SNAP assistance, we're usually the first name that pops up.
Okay.
Yeah, great question. So we help with that. That's a very in-depth process of that, but it's really cool. We just opened a care center, and so that's a phone center for more of those direct phone calls. And in the first 3 months, we had over 15,000 phone calls connecting people with those. And in Hennepin County, they're in a backlog. And so right now it's taking over 3 months to get those benefits because they just aren't able to get through all those processes. And with SNAP, they usually only last 6 months for benefits. And so if you apply for it and you get it 3 months later, you still only get it for 3 months. And then you have to reapply, and it's very interesting how that works. And so we're trying to work with Hennepin County to see if there's a way we can help them speed up this process. But as you get out to other counties, it's usually about 3 weeks. 3 to 6 weeks to get those benefits. So again, it's really important for us to be able to connect them with a local food shelf or talk about a local distribution site that they can go pick up food that their family can get. CSFP, that's our senior program. So it's a box that seniors can pick up once a month. That's the only thing that will actually drop off at our distribution center. So people will drive to Brooklyn Park, pick up that box. It has boxed goods, but it also has a lot of fresh produce, and they can get that box once a month. That's also a government program. We have volunteers pack those boxes as well. We also have an interesting new partnership with DoorDash, where DoorDash will pick up the box and drive it right to seniors' homes. And a new initiative.
Free of charge?
Yeah, DoorDash. Initially, when it started in the pandemic, DoorDash waived the fee. I think Second Harvest now is taking on that fee with those. I'll talk about Kitchen Coalition next. This is a really cool, innovative program that Second Harvest started in 2020, and Feeding America has really taken an eye to this and is trying to spread this nationwide. So Kitchen Coalition was started that first weekend of the pandemic. It was named Minnesota Central Kitchen. That rings any bells, but it's evolved. I won't say how it started, but now it's evolved. We're working with over 26 local restaurants in the Twin Cities. All these meals that are made by these small business staff. 60% of the food in this meal comes straight from Second Harvest Heartland. We distribute to these restaurants. And then the other 40% of the meal is food that they would have thrown away at the restaurant. They're preparing culturally accepted meals and they're packaging them up. We have volunteers and 2 trucks pick up these meals, and then we send them to different distribution sites. So it's either, assisted living homes, the list goes on, but the need is really there. So since 2020 with prepared meals, we've served 5 million meals, prepared meals. We're pumping out 25,000 prepared meals a week. Yeah, the need is huge for these prepared meals, and it's for neighbors who don't have access to a kitchen. Maybe they have a health disability that prevents them from cooking. It's just been a huge need for our community. A big thing too for college students that don't have access to their food at their local university. So we have some sites at the U has a food shelf there that we send those prepared meals to, and we have a couple others as well. Any questions about Kitchen Coalition? That's been a really cool model, and we've had some launch sites in the state as well as outside. So
Is that frozen meals or fresh meals?
fresh meals, but as we send out into rural areas, we freeze them and then we send them out in a refrigerated truck. Great question. Rochester took our template and they started that system in Rochester. Duluth is looking at starting this in that area. And then Fargo also recently took this model and is starting it in their area. Yeah,
Do people have to qualify to pick up these meals, or they just walk in?
great question. So they're not going to the restaurant to pick up these meals. We're taking them to distribution sites and they don't have to apply. They just have to get in line and they can take those meals.
And are the restaurants, fully donating their labor and that additional product that they're adding into it? Or are they being compensated in some way? for
Yeah,
those?
great question. Second Harvest is paying the staff to prepare these meals.
Oh,
And so usually they'll come in before store hours and they'll prepare these meals and then we'll come pick them up. So we're also helping these small businesses.
Their staff employees.
Yep. And initially, this really helped save a lot of restaurants during the pandemic when a lot of furloughed chefs weren't cooking. We were taking them in and having to prepare these meals.
Is there a list of those restaurants somewhere publicized so that we can go support them?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, we have a list on our website. A few off the top of my head. David Fema, his restaurants, he prepares meals there. Afro Deli in St. Paul, they're a big partner. Let's see. Chow Girls Catering is a big partner of ours. If you've ever heard of them. Yeah, those are 3 few I can name off.
Do you provide the food for Meals on Wheels?
Great question. We do not. This is kind of a similar model, but we don't, that's a different, they do their own purchasing for food.
And how about other kind of, what other kind of programs are out there that are doing similar stuff to you and as you are?
Yeah, that's a great question. So another cool thing about Second Harvest is we also work with other nonprofits to source their food. So if you heard of Union Gospel Mission, they source their food through us. So they're purchasing that from us. So we're really working with different partners that are doing food distributions. And we're just kind of that source of the cheapest food that they can find. Yeah, that's a great question. Another, like, United Way does a lot of similar work in the Twin Cities. But then if you think of like Feed My Starving Children, that's international, where this all stays local. Yeah, great question. This is the Kitchen Coalition, I like to call it community serving community. It's those local restaurants that a lot of community members are familiar with. And again, they can serve their community with a familiar, nutritious meal. That's, sourced a lot from our cheaper products from Second Harvest, but they're also using ingredients they would have just thrown away at the restaurant. Then FoodRx is a really interesting program too. That's working with health insurance, and so that's complicated, but we're able to do it. So we're working with a few hospitals right now. If a patient is deemed or known as food insecure, the doctor can write this as a prescription. So this lasts 3 months. Let's say someone's just diagnosed with diabetes and they don't know how to cook with this new diet that they have. This FoodRx box, we customize these so that they're prepared for these new health challenges. And so we had a nutritionist create these recipes The initial ingredients are all in the box. The prescription lasts for 3 months. They can they'll be familiar with these meals. They have the recipes forever, and they're able to just create that new those new recipes for their life. And that's a really big need, and it's been really we've been pumping out a lot of Food RX boxes to different hospitals throughout the community. But really technical because their insurance pays for it. It's a funky system, but we're trying to cut through red tape and serve our neighbors there.
And you customize those for different needs, so
health
diabetic
Yes.
boxes and.
Yeah, I think we have 4 or 5 different boxes that I have for different health needs. Yeah. And then child nutrition. I mean, we advocated a lot for that free child school lunch that was passed last year, and that's helped our needs too through the school year. But then when children are hungry during the summer, we're doing a lot of food distribution sites throughout communities at libraries or fire departments. Even at some schools, their cafeterias will open up for families to come pick up meals through the summer. Any questions about these programs?
No, but it's just awesome to hear about that. This is just so enlightening.
Yeah, and it's wild, even for when I joined, hearing the numbers of what we're serving out of our one distribution site in Brooklyn Park.
How does the child nutrition program work in relation to the parents and children? Both the parents and children are receiving food, or just the children?
Yeah, great question. So it depends. So like a backpack program,
Okay.
the kid will get a bag of food at the end of the day that they can put in their backpack to go. And that's usually enough for 2 to 3 people per weekend. When they're picking up during the summer, that kind of thing, it's for the whole family that comes. Yeah. Great question. Well, again, thank you so much for having me here. This is my contact information, but we'd love to have you come volunteer. It's always fun to see our distribution site in action. Again, couple hour shift, and it's kind of fun to just see that fresh produce in your hands going out, being sent out right after out into our communities.
Where in Brooklyn Park are you located?
We're right off of Botanow, so you go right off of the freeway, and it's kind of by that. There's a CarMax and Goodwill bins. We're right behind that on Winnetka Avenue. There's a Wagner's Drive-In. You've heard of that? It's kind of a local staple. Yeah.
How do you advertise for volunteers?
Yeah, great question.
Where do you send the material?
Our big pushes are for corporate groups. We're in such an agriculturally rich state. We're really fortunate to have like General Mills and Post and Target here. We get a lot of corporate groups coming in. We get a lot of church groups coming in, youth groups, Boy Scouts, that kind of thing. And the really cool thing about Second Harvest is we let kids come. So ages 8 and above. A lot of organizations don't let young children come in, but we kind of let the whole family come and volunteer, which is fun. And we have really cool at our volunteer center. It was the 6th food bank in this country to have this. It's a clean room. So we're actually having specialty volunteers come and break down bulk chicken, bison, pork. And when they do that, they have to have someone from the USDA has to come and watch them do all that processing. So we have specialty volunteers who know what they're doing, cutting this all up and getting that sent out to communities. We have our own stamp, we have to stamp on it. It's something. But really cool thing too about being in this state is we'll get donations from these corporations. So sometimes you'll see an 8-foot tower of loose Fruit Loops saran wrapped on a pallet. And we have volunteers box that up, put it in bags, box it up, and we send it out there from our site. This time of year, it's a lot of Halloween cereal that hasn't been sold. We'll get that and send it out.
Where do you get produce in the winter?
Yeah, great question. So being a member of Feeding America, we get really good sourcing from throughout the country. So we'll see a lot of potatoes. It's like a lot of the same stuff, onions. Yeah, it's a lot probably from the south or warmer areas, California. Yeah.
Seems like nutrition has like endless potential for health. So, what you do with getting nutrients out to people kind of borders on like the health industry. you know, like we have health insurance. I saw you had one partner with, one program that partners with health insurance. So on one hand, there's in this potential, on the other hand, how do you, you know, see long-term less need of people, your work for people?
Yeah, great question. Another highlight of the health too, we don't accept pop donations. So if like Coke reaches out or Pepsi, we don't take soda. That's a new thing we've started, since my time. And candy, like candy corporations, we don't take mass, candy donations. What we see in urban areas are these food deserts. So we see Aldi's are pulling out of communities, or Walmart will close down. And we see within a 5 to 7 mile radius, no grocery stores. And so if you don't have a vehicle, you're having to walk more, if it's more than a mile, you're not gonna walk somewhere to get pounds and pounds of food to bring back to your family. And so how can we work in these food deserts to get more than just a gas station open, so we can get nutritious food to people and not just all this processed fast food that they can get from gas stations? So that's an alarming thing to see in our state, or especially in the Twin Cities, is how do we get food in a 1 to 2 mile radius for families who don't have access to transportation? And again, people who are working all day, how can we get them food so they can feed their families, but also work? It's complex. I'm trying to
I used to live in New Mexico, and there the produce was much cheaper and much more, more varieties. And I could come back to Minnesota, especially in the rural area, and it would be very scant. And it seemed like, well, how, you know, the people could do much better with having more plentiful produce.
Yeah, great, yeah, and I grew up in Benson, so what, in Benson, Minnesota, 2.5 hours west, a lot of sugar beets. I mean, you can't feed people with sugar beets, and so how are you sourcing the right kind of produce, like you said, that people, neighbors can actually eat? Yeah. Yeah,
You mentioned earlier about trying to cut the need for this program, these programs in half by the year 2030.
yep.
What is the procedure that you're using to try to do that?
Yeah, great question. So last year we had a record-breaking amount of people walking through food shelf doors. 7.5 million neighbors walked through a food shelf door last year. So that's the number we're trying to cut in half by 2030. And that could be getting them the resources for SNAP, getting them signed up for CSFP. So they're getting food, but they're also able to, you know, be more stable in their lives. And so we can't do it alone. So we're also trying to advocate in the state. We're also having other organizations come with us to also maybe get connected to people so they can get signed up for electricity if they're struggling with paying that, how they can get, you know, there's organizations around. We're not trying to absorb all of this. We're trying to work together in order to make our neighbors have more stable lives.
How difficult is it to work with other agencies like?
Very difficult, and it's county by county. You know, every county works differently and has different feelings of different organizations coming in. And we don't want to come into a community thinking that we know everything we know better than them. We're coming in and hearing how their issue, like what issues they're having, how we can walk alongside them, and, you know, really just be the source of food for them.
So,
Yeah.
Sorry,
Go.
do you have representatives from Second Harvest who do lobbying at the state legislature, for example, or work with economic sources?
Yeah, great question.
Convince them to work with you?
Yeah, great question. We do have a public affairs team. That's 3 people. So we have someone at the state capitol at all times.
Okay.
I think once a year, we have our director go to DC to talk to senators there. That's kind of just starting, but we know we won't be able to do it without government assistance, and so we're hoping that works out. Yeah.
Are some people reluctant to use your services out of pride or something, and how do you deal with that if they are?
Yeah, great question. We hear that a lot from our food shelf partners. And so again, it's meeting the neighbors where they're at. And so with prepared meals too, it's kind of nice when they get that right away versus having to get to a food shelf. And it's also talking to food shelves, seeing how they're working with their neighbors to make it known that it's okay to get help when you need it. And yeah, great question. Complex, but yeah.
Do, that begs the question to me, how are the people actually providing the food at the food shelf trained, prepped, to be non-judgmental and that sort of thing? That's not Second Harvest per se. I'm
Yeah.
talking about one step removed, but do you know anything about that?
Yeah, so as we're working with this focus group, particularly rural counties, how are we getting staff at food shelves that speak multiple languages? How do we get, just how do we get people to be warm and welcoming? And I think one of those big things is a language barrier. And so that's how we're trying to see how are we recruiting volunteers to be at food shelves? How are we retaining those and keeping those and growing those to be a more diverse volunteer staff as well?
My recollection was that Second Harvest does some training events for food shelf leadership in communities,
Okay,
correct?
I haven't heard of that.
Okay,
I know maybe in the past they have. I think our tone now is coming in to walk alongside and not to think we know better than our communities.
and what happened to the Maplewood site?
Yeah, we needed a bigger building. And so
Yeah.
we were just leasing that. We were in a
Okay,
lease
it was a
program.
lease.
And
Okay.
so I don't know what it's in it now.
Yeah.
But I got to be there for one day in 2020 and then we moved in March, right before everything shut down. We moved to Brooklyn Park. Yeah. But a nice thing too about, big thing at that old facility, we had a lot of trucks. They'd come. One of our highest paid staff are certified truck drivers. And so they'd come and they'd unload and they'd be idling while they unload and then we'd reload that truck to be sent out. And so we were trying to decrease the time of them just sitting there idling. So now with our new facility, we have just an unloading side of the building and a loading side. And so there's no more idling in between. Trucks are getting either unloaded or loaded at the same time, which really cuts those hours back, which is nice. Or hours spent actually sending food out versus just sitting there.
And saves the environment.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we have about 30 to 40 trucks of different sizes. And so you don't want to bring a big semi into the Twin Cities. We have different sizes that are easier to transport in those areas, but then big semis. I did a truck ride along in February. We went down to Mankato and worked our way back up. We distributed 23,000 pounds in that one trip. Our first stop was at Mankato State University. And they have a food shelf there. When the week before we went, over 556 students went to that food shelf and they can go once a week. 556. We sent 800 pounds, a little over 800 pounds of food to that food shelf. Just interesting to hear. You don't think of college students and hunger, but there's a real need there. And then it's interesting just to see the partnerships that our truck drivers have with these local food shelves. And they gain this respect for one another and they know their names and as they're dropping off this food. And it's really fun to see.
Are these Second Harvest owned trucks or?
Yeah, so we work on a leasing program and we do that. We just switched to this because if a truck breaks down on the road, now that leasing company will send us a truck that same day so they can pick up that trailer and continue their route. Versus if we own the trucks, we'd be stuck on the side of the road until they could get a tow truck to come tow the truck, fix it, and then that food would just be sitting on the side of the road. So more cost effective. But they have our brand on it and you can see we have wrapped trucks and that. Yeah, great questions. And again, thank you so much for letting me come and talk to you guys about our organization. I don't think a lot of people know the difference between a food bank and a food shelf, so we appreciate you let me inform you today on that.
Thank you.
Yeah.